It's great to be back once again, and once again, and once again, as always. Thank you for joining. Also, our instructor has some classes in, and they will be finishing in a few minutes, and they will be joining us. So I'm happy to announce also a friend today because I have known him for so long, and it's Darko Mitev because he has such an amazing career and motivational story. So I will let him tell us something about him.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. I'm Darko Mitev. I'm a CG journalist from Macedonia, and I'm currently living in Dublin, Ireland, where I'm working as lead character artist in Brownback Films. So as Stefan mentioned, I started back in Macedonia 11 years ago, believe it or not now. I've been involved in VFX, feature animation, TV show animation, a little bit of gaming, lots of commercials. So I touched a bit of everything and just keeping it fun, I guess.
Perfect. So going to make a few seconds break so Darko can change his screen.
Alrighty, so I guess we're live. So I'm going to start by telling a little bit about myself and my career before we jump into the presentation. So as I mentioned, I'm a CG generalist, and I focused mostly on modeling, texturing, and lighting. I don't really do too much rigging and animation. I think three disciplines are enough. So I pretty much have a methodology of working, and that is I try to keep up with the tools and with the developing technology. So the way I'm doing that is by trying to pick my projects, my personal project especially, to be the opposite of what I'm doing in a production environment. So for example, at the moment I am working as a character artist. So for the most part, and I should mention stylized characters as well. So for the most part, when I'm doing personal project, I focus on either realistic characters or environments. Or if I do stylized characters, I try to do something I haven't done before. So always trying to kind of stay relevant to the time, I guess. So today we're gonna talk about one of my recent projects, which was environment. I jumped too quickly. And that is this project called The Experiment. So this project took me quite a while to finish, I think a couple of months in total, but I was only working after hours, after work, and for weekend and stuff like that. And it's a 1,000 frame animation, which, as you can imagine, takes some time to render. So Stefan will play the video of the finished project now, and then I will continue with the presentation. Alrighty, so that was the final video that I rendered, and I do want to point out that in the end I could not use my own computer to render all of this because I used Arnold for rendering, and for those of you who don't know how Arnold works, it's not really the fastest render engine when it comes to environments, especially dark environments, because they require a lot of GI calculation, and Arnold uses brute force kind of GI method, so it's a little bit slow, but it does give a lot of nice results. So I decided to go with that one in the end. So we're going to start by looking at inspiration and design and how this project came to be. So I'm writing a little story just in my free time, and from time to time trying to do some artworks to kind of visualize how some of the scenes and characters of that story would look like. It's not a book or anything like that. It's just something that I do for fun. And nope. So every time I'm starting a new project, I like to gather a lot of reference. So I find one main inspiration kind of image, and I try to dissect what I really like about it. And the wall textures, the angled arches, and all of that. So, and the overall grungy feel to the image. And so I try to look for references just to kind of support that, because usually one reference is not enough to kind of give you a full idea of what you want to do. So these are some images from Skopje. Was it 1863 or 1963? It was like a big earthquake that leveled almost the city. So there was a big rebuild in Skopje. And Kenzo Tange, a Japanese architect, was involved in a lot of the reconstruction. So some of the buildings, they are, and he, like I should mention, he was a brutalist kind of architect. So a lot of the buildings in Skopje, they have this hard concrete brutalist feel. And so I try to look for inspiration there first. And then from there, I kind of go and try to find some detailed like pipes and cables and how they connect in big kind of underground tunnels, and the overall concrete, like bare concrete look, and like the depth of some of these windows, and again, more arches and some Soviet Union bunkers, and how the, how the light kind of interacts with all of this concrete inside, and some pipes and cables and stuff like that. So I make a huge kind of reference board, and I don't use all of that for the project as inspiration, but sometimes I pick up pieces here and there, and kind of inspire myself to or like to come up with new ideas and stuff like that. So I knew I wanted to do some kind of a prison that will have like a containment chamber for experiments. So this kind of image was what I was kind of looking for as a massive kind of big, massive, heavy door that would look almost impossible to kind of open. And then I got a bunch of references for just overall aesthetics, and I'm a big fan of steampunk. So I kind of went and found some steampunk images, and then a lot of props. I knew that this scene is going to be very complex, so I was going to need a lot of props. So I kind of like the retro feel, of like the retro technology feel. So I went with the old fuses and the old electricity meters and gas meters. Like they're pretty much obsolete nowadays. They're all replaced with digital, but it's just something cool about the tactile look they have. And a lot of textural work, reference, I should say, and some detail work. A lot of these I end up not using. Like I use like 3 or 4 of these connecting pieces, but it's always good to have something. Even if you don't use it, like at this point, I'm not really sure where it's going to take me. So when I'm starting a project, I kind of like to prep myself to kind of have a recipe for success, so to speak. So I'm kind of measuring 180 centimeter human, and these are like a generic scale references that I use for walls, doors, and stairs. and I take like this is like a Nick averagement from ZBrush. I just exported back into Maya and scaled it to 180 centimeters, and a generic 300 centimeters wall and a door. And I'm gonna do a quick boolean of them. This is not like for modeling. It's more of when I'm placing doors later in the scene, I don't want to spend the time to go back and measure. I have those already. I could just show them on a layer and I pretty much start working. So I save a lot of time by doing this little prep work at the beginning. And so this is pretty much how I start. I kind of measure my proportions. I place my generic human and start slowly by building the pieces. This is what I call a blocking stage. This geometry is not going to be used for the final model. It's more of a placeholder to kind of get the conversation started, so to speak, and to inspire me to kind of think of ideas. And when I take this into 2D and I do a little bit of sketching on top, I can have a proper perspective, and I can kind of make my life pretty much a little bit easier. So yeah, I'm pretty much gonna block this out, and I'm gonna do it in a modular kind of fashion. Those of you who are in gaming, you pretty much know this kind of workflow. And so the idea is you would build a section and then you repeat it a bunch of times, and then most of the details that I'm going to model would be in one of the section, and then because it's repeated, that's going to simulate complexity. And only then I would go after and add custom details just to kind of break the repetition, that because eventually you're going to start noticing repetition, right? And no matter how many details you have in the one section, if you don't add custom details to kind of break things up, you're going to start spotting things that are repeating. So I am almost done with the first section as a blocking, and I'm going to snap it, and I'm going to see what's the distance that I need to do, to translate the section. So I'm using the instance copy with the measured distance, and that pretty much gave me the exact copy of all of them. But because they're instance, I have the opportunity to change one of them and place the camera, and all of them would update. So I can actually see the entire corridor updating live because they're all connected to each other. So it's a really good way of working and kind of blocking, especially like in the blocking stage. So here I have the 300 centimeters wall, but I decided that I want this to be a lot bigger. I want it to feel very kind of like hopeless for whoever is trapped inside. So this kind of like dark, cold feeling. And once I have just this generic placement, I'm just going to quickly hop into Sketchbook now. I use Sketchbook instead of Photoshop because it's a very light program and it's free. And I'm kind of like looking at my references and trying to find cool details that I can kind of get inspired by. So I'm like looking at how things open and how like where they have handles and stuff like that. So I'm quickly going to sketch things out. It's not going to be pretty. If you've seen any of my other works or videos, you pretty much know that I am not going to waste too much time in 2D. The only thing that I'm doing in 2D is roughly throwing ideas just because it's fast. Like I could easily do this in 3D directly, and I will for some of the pieces as well, like especially for the interior pieces. But just because the entire corridor would be a bit more work to kind of sketch in 3D directly, and I have cables and stuff like that that are not like as easily done or as fast, I should say. So I do this very, very rough sketch and try to think of like what kind of assets I already have that I can reuse. Because when you're doing like a very complex environment like this one, you pretty much want to reuse assets if you've already built them. And we're gonna look at this in the next video, which is the modeling. Is I'm gonna try to reuse assets from one of my previous scenes before this one, and then modify them and kind of update where I need to. But apart from that, I'm not going to really spend too much time in the design stage. This is kind of enough. Like, I've kind of made the workflow for myself that this is enough to kind of give me the food for my brain, so to speak, to kind of understand what I'm going for. And I can quickly go in 3D and continue the work from here. So modeling in kitbash. And when I say kitbash, I don't mean by using kitbash sets from other people, which is fine, by the way, if you do want to do that. But I tend to use my own kind of models because I do a lot of environments. I do a lot of personal work as well. So I do have quite a big library of stuff that I already made. So continuing right where I left off, I pretty much start measuring things out and be like, okay, is the latch long enough? Do I have what I need? And I'm going to start designing the chamber. I knew that I'm going to have one chamber open. At this point, I'm not exactly sure about the story that I'm going to have in the final video, but at least I know that I'm going to have a lot of closed cells and one that is open. And later, I'm going to figure out why it's open. Like, is it just broken? Is somebody, trying to escape, or somebody just escaped, or it could be whatever. But that doesn't matter what the story would be. I knew that I'm going to have to design whatever is inside because the camera will be seeing it at some point. So this is my favorite part of the project, where I kind of zone in a little bit. I like blast music in my ears and just try to have fun. I try to imagine like if you are the designer making these beds for these people, like how would you do it? Like what is going to be your thought process? So I try to kind of imagine like, well, they kind of want to keep these guys semi-contained. They're probably going to be locked onto these beds because they're going to be injecting stuff and I don't know, whatever they're going to be doing. But also they're going to be there for a long time. So I kind of want to make the design just semi-comfortable so that it doesn't look too like a torture machine and more like a medical bed. That was what the vibe that I was going for. So I'm trying to place it where the elbows would kind of be for a person. I would leave like a room, and like where the spine curves, I'm going to have like a raised area as well. And for the head and the neck, there's going to be like a little angle so that the head can rest. And also I'm going to have a lot of soft padding on top. Like this is like the under layer of the bed. So it's like layer 1, the metal construction. And after that, I'm going to go and start building, the soft padding and all the bolts and rivets and like pistons and how this thing works. I'm gonna try. It's like being a little kid, when you're back in the day when you were in your room, and you kind of try to take toys and kind of make up stories in your mind. So that's literally what I'm doing right now. I'm like making up stories in my mind and try to visualize how that will work. And just to kind of make things a bit more interesting, I kind of made the connection a bit asymmetrical of this thing, and just kind of measuring things out again. Also, a little bit of topology work. I don't really bother too much for topology at this stage, but every once in a while, I do want to kind of preview this, how this is going to look like from, with a subdivision turned on. So I do kind of do a little bit of just enough so it doesn't break too much. So here, like the calf muscles are like wider at the top. So I kind of start to kind of populate the design with a bit of logical, excuse me, a logical design languages. So yeah, and here's like I went a little bit far with with the, like, with the soft padding, which I extracted from the base, and I went in and added like subdivision and stuff. And that's because I wanted to get the soft feel of it, and I knew that the design of it's not going to change too drastically. And so here I kind of trying to figure out how it's going to look like, and I placed a couple of lights, and I'm doing just the very basic test render with Arnold, just to kind of see. I'm going to do a very basic test render just to see like how this is it's gonna read. And here are some of the kitbash elements that I was talking about. These are done for my previous project called Dublin 2047, and you can find it on the ArtStation. And I also have a free making of on my YouTube channel for that one. So if anybody's interested how to build these assets and stuff like that, you can check that out. So yeah, just a very basic render of that. And I'm gonna skip forward because this is like a month and a half of modeling involved in this. So here's pretty much the final model and how it came to be. You see, you have loads of details, loads of layers, but they are all kind of duplicates of each other and placed in a kind of a interesting way that would kind of make them look different than they are. So I do have a lot of unique assets, but then they're duplicated even more. So yeah, here's the final bed design. And I decided to add a bit of soft padding on the door as well, because I figured like when the door closes, the knees of this guy or gal would be pretty much against the metal. So I was like, that's a bit too cruel. So I added that. And then just a little bit of like extra details like speakers and security cameras and like ventilation shafts and all of that. And a lot of these I did model from scratch just for this project. And some of these pipes were taken from that Dublin 2047 scene. So here's like a quick camera rollout just to kind of see if I like at every frame. So I would go and on a frame by frame, I would stop and try to see if anything is missing or stuff like that, and I would add detail as needed for that shot. And with that being said, we can switch to lighting. Now, lighting was key in selling this environment because everything is modular, which means everything repeats. So you kind of need to be very creative with your lighting so you can hide stuff in light and shadow, and you can kind of accentuate things and make things look different than they actually are. So the lighting in this one is a little bit complex. I mean, it has a lot of lights, but it doesn't really. It's not that complex. What I meant, and the amount of lights are needed especially because I'm using Arnold. The more direct light you have in Arnold, the faster the render times you're going to be, pretty much. So you can see all the lights I have grouped. So I have main ceiling lights, and they are separated into key and fill lights. And by key lights, I mean lights that are directly affecting the scene, and they're like the strongest kind of lights affecting the scene. And you can have more than one key light, especially when you're working in animation. And they are pretty much just the simple area lights, and there's nothing crazy about the light setup. As you can see, some of the attributes of them is I'm going to hide all of them and render only one, just so we can see the contribution. So there's nothing crazy going on. I have just a basic color, and I have the intensity dialed in the way I want, and I have a spread parameter. So the spread parameter actually takes the cone angle of the light and it kind of shrinks it down. So it turns the area light kind of into spotlight in a way. So it kind of narrows down the beam of light. And that's like activating barn doors. For those of you who are like on a set, you probably know some of this stuff. Like in a real light, you would have this metal kind of brackets that you can turn on to kind of direct the light and kind of use for set lighting. So I place these after every section, and I left a little bit of a gap here and there, and I even turned off one of the lights completely. As you can see down in the scene, there's like one of them right there is like turned off, and the one in the middle, it's actually turned on, but the intensity is very low. So when the camera goes, it's going to go from dark to light to dark, and it kind of has a nice dynamic. So with that, I am going to turn on the fill lights, and I'm going to save. Actually, yeah, I'm going to turn on the fill lights so we can kind of see what are they looking like. And the reason why I have them is because I wanted to have a very art-directed look to the scene. I didn't want it to go like pure photorealistic or pure cinema, like CG. So I kind of went a little bit in between. A good kind of reference would be like a game cinematic, like a high-quality game cinematic. That was kind of the look that I was going for this. And the fill lights are pretty much the same. The spread is the same value. The intensity is a lot lower because their job is to kind of fill the place with lights. So if I turn on, you're going to see there's a very slight change. But if I toggle on and off, you're going to see there's just a little bit more light. Kind of just you want to kind of use your lights to sculpt the shapes. So your model is going to look only as good as you present it, right? So you kind of want to think of what kind of models you're dealing with. And in this scene, it's particularly difficult because I have very round cylindrical objects and I have a very large areas of flat objects. And that combination can be very tricky to kind of light because different objects react differently to the lights. So that's why I kind of broken down my lighting into separate sections and I'm controlling each of it individually. So here is like the fill light of the ceiling, and this one is purely to help Arnold cope with the intensity of the darkness that I have in the scene, because the thing that I have to do here is crank up the ray depth in Arnold render settings, which will increase the GI bounces, and the scene would get more indirect lighting. But the more you do that, your render time is going to start screaming, right? So I'm placing lights to kind of mimic that GI effect and kind of help Arnold give it more directional light, which I can control on a per light basis because every light has intensity parameters, right? And it has subdivision parameters for shadows and stuff like that. So I can actually control how much render time I'm gonna get, how much I'm gonna slow my render time in comparison to the GI bounces I'm gonna get. And as you can see, this video is not sped up. This is actually rendering real time. Granted, I don't have any shaders or displacement or atmosphere in this one yet, but it's still a very complex scene, and it renders almost real time. So as you can see, those fill lights are starting to kind of reveal the silhouette of the shapes, and that's why I added all of these layers of objects, because I knew that I'm going to have a top lighting, and when you have a top lighting, you pretty much going to have a silhouette of everything that is above you. So that kind of those fill lights were specifically placed to kind of accentuate the pipes and the cables hanging and give nice highlights when I start adding those. And then all the chambers, I wanted to have warm light because I knew that I'm going to grade this to look cold and blue. So having a little bit of warmth, it kind of, complementary colors would kind of help focus the attention of the viewer into the chambers when the camera is passing by. Everything is going to be greenish, bluish, kind of cold looking, bare concrete, nothing really, and like no saturated colors. And then you have the warm light shining through those windows, and it's gonna really help focus the viewer where I want. So as you can see, they're going to spill light and onto the other objects, and they're going to cast a lot of nice highlights and shadows. It just kind of creates a little bit more dynamic into the scene. Next up, we're going to have is pipe lights, and what I call pipe lights. And that is purely because I have some of the pipes are transparent and I have liquid inside. So the whole thing is at the bottom of the hallway, there is this liquid container that has a glowing blue liquid inside. And these are area lights that are turned into a cylinder shape. In Arnold, you can turn area lights into multiple shapes, not just a flat cards. And as you can see, this part is going to be transparent when I render, and it has a liquid inside. So I wanted that liquid to kind of glow blue. And I decided the best way to do that is I'm going to introduce a little bit of atmospheric fog. And I'm going to introduce light in every pipe. So it's going to add up to a lot of lights because I have this repeated like 8 or something times. And I have 2 pipes on the top and the bottom. So, it's the amount of light is going to, increase, but they are only there for a specific reason, and they don't affect the other objects too much because I wanted to keep them very isolated, very contained. I tried having them glow and cast like a blue spill, but it immediately started to make the scene a lot more cartoony. And that was not something that I was going for. This was like a very different kind of vibe. So I toned down the glow and all of that. And have a bunch of tiny lights all around the scene. And they are placed in very specific places where I have electric boxes going into, a light blinker that, I have animated yellow and green light blinkers. So a specific frame when the camera passes by, they can kind of like blink. And I would support that with sound design later after I render all of this. So all these things kind of help. They kind of help sell that this is a bit more believable scene. Although I was not looking for like a VFX kind of photorealistic, I do want it to feel very cinematic, kind of realistic, so to speak, like fantasy realistic. So this phone here is very black, and I have a very contrasty lighting. So I added a fill light, a light linked only to that phone, just to kind of help it pop a little bit. So you can see those lights, they just create a little glows here and there, and they help read the scene. And like the cameras and the speakers and everything, they have these lights. And all of these lights will have a volume emission when I add, like at the end, I'm going to add the volume shader to the scene, the atmospheric volume. And you will see that will make huge difference to how the atmosphere works. And now in front of every door, I have a light indicating that the cell is working or not working. So all of the doors, I have a green light saying that it's all good. The subject is inside and it's, contained. And the open door will have a red light. And so I wanted to have a light in front of it just to kind of illuminate the area around. Again, I'm trying to control this on a very granular level because I want very specific art direction for the lighting. And all of these are very, very subtle, but when they add up, they make a big difference. So as you can see, the red lights and the green light. And again, when we have the volume, you're going to see they're going to make a lot bigger difference. And next up, we're going to have the door, the open cell. Because all the cells inside have orange lights, that means that something inside has orange, like either an orange light bulb or anything like that. So I placed 2 lights, and one of them is to give direction of the shadows because I will have the light bulb visible. So one of them is just a normal spotlight with an orange color to it, and it has another area light which has the volume parameter cranked up to 3. By default, the volume is set to 1, and if you want to be like physically correct, a light cannot produce more volume than its intensity. But I don't care about that. I want to, like, I try to be physically correct, so I stay with with the laws of physics and all that. But I like stuff like volume and specular. I art direct a lot of those, and I cheat a lot of those to get specific results. So you can see this door clearly pulls your eye towards like the brightest place on the image. And now I'm gonna go and turn on the atmospheric volume. So if you go to your Arnold environment section, you can see there's an atmosphere, and if you browse, you can load the atmosphere volume. So I have a density and color. So the color, I set it to dark blue, and in the density, I input AI noise with the coordinate space set to world and a little bit of octaves and distortion. And what that will do is we will kind of modulate it's going to put like a fractal texture in the fog, and when the camera moves, it's going to look like it's moving through a cloud instead of a solid volume. And that also helps a lot. So as you can see, turning on the volume makes a huge difference on how you read the light, how you read the scene rather. So you can see the difference when I toggle on and off. And that was the final lighting for the scene. And after this, I pretty much went into texturing and shading, which was all done. Well, not all, but I would say 90% of this was done procedurally. But unfortunately, that's like a very lengthy kind of topic to cover. So I'm not gonna cover this in here. But in the end, I can tell you where can you go and kind of learn more about this stuff. So this was the final lighting, and after this and after the shading, I went and used Super Render Farms, who contacted me actually right at the beginning on the project, and they liked some of the work that I had, and they offered to sponsor my project to be rendered for free on their farm, which, as you can imagine, I was thrilled to do. And so yeah, that's why I credited them at the end of the video. So pretty much everything I did here, I uploaded to the farm, and like not a week, like 4.5 days later, I received the final renders. And that leads me to compositing. Compositing for this one was done in Nuke, and the comp is extremely simple. Like any of you who know compositing, this is like a child's play. I'm not a compositor, so I don't try to pretend that I am. So I don't go and do crazy comps. This is the raw render. As you can see, this is like untouched render, like raw EXRs. And I'm trying to get 90% of the look in my raw render. And in the comp, I try to just help my render and accentuate. So as you can see, that's the whole comp. There's nothing crazy to it. And I have the master render at the top, and I'm shuffling all the render passes that I set. So the volume, I have the code, which only few objects have, the SSS for the blood and the soft padding. I have transmission, which is all the refraction, specular, and diffuse. And some of these were a little bit noisy. I was kind of concerned with render time, so I left here's the volume pass, and have particles as well. So yeah, some of these passes were a little bit noisy, and I used a denoiser. That's actually one of the main reasons why I did the comp. I shuffled them, and in each node you can specify what pass you want to isolate, and then you can select 2 of them and add a plus node, or a merge node rather, and you set the merge node to a plus combination. So all of them are literally copies of themselves set to plus, and you just input a different pass going next to it, in it actually. And in few of them, like the specular and the SSS, they were a little bit noisy, and the volumes as well. So I put a denoise node, which, as the name says, it just denoises. And one thing that I did for the specular pass is you can barely see it, but I added just a tiny bit of glow on the specular. It's one of those things that you don't notice it too much, but if it's not there, all your specular just looks too sharp, and it is obviously CG. So just layering them on top, and the SSS, as you can see, the soft pads are black, and then you add them. But here I encountered a problem, and that is denoising the SSS and the specular killed a lot of the detail that I have, which was a bummer because I spent so much time, doing scratch maps and grunge maps and all of that. So I didn't know how to do this, to be honest, and I Googled how to do sharpening in Nuke, and this thing popped up, and it's pretty much a constant node with a blur node, and you kind of use it to sharpen you kind of crunch the levels of your image, and you add it on top, and kind of crunches it and sharpens it up a little bit. Which was a very good trick. And as you can see now, a lot of the details, just start to kind of come back. And I didn't want to exaggerate it too much, but as you can see, I'm getting back all those details that I lost with the denoiser. So yeah, a lot of great stuff is, you start something, you don't know how to do it, but you just figure it out along the way. There's no excuse for not doing stuff because you don't know how to do it. Like if I was waiting to know how to do stuff, I would never do anything because, there's always something you don't know, and you just start, I guess. So the volume was done in Houdini. It was not done by me. It was done by a friend of mine called Annabella. She's awesome, Annabella Faria. She's an awesome lead. I believe she's a lead effect artist in Brown Bag Films. And same thing, denoising, color grading, and adding that back on top, and a little bit of adjustment. And we're gonna go to the particles next, and the particles were like last minute. I even had everything done, comped, and then I was like, I'm missing something, and that was something when the camera goes by, I wanted to see just something breaks, the monotony. And I just took literally a plane, and I put a ramp into the opacity with a circular ramp, and I instanced that using mesh network, and I froze them in place. And when the camera moves through them, it looks like they are particles, but they're not. Actually, they are just literal geometry. And here is a fake chromatic aberration using God rays effect. With the God rays, if you disable the green channel, for example, if you leave only the red, and if you disable the other channels, and if you offset that channel just slightly, you get chromatic aberration. And in the very end, using the Z-depth pass to add depth of field, using the Z defocus, which is pretty much... and here is something interesting. I actually color graded my render to look flat, because when I apply my final color grade on top, the shadows were too dark. So I flattened the image. I always try to render my images as flat as possible, but I actually end up flattening it even more before applying the final color correction, because this was not the final grade out of Nuke. Like this was like 97%. And you can see comparison of my comp before and after. Not much has changed. As I said, I want to keep my stuff looking great in the render themselves. So yeah, pretty much I went to Premiere, and I have a plugin for Premiere that has real world cameras, camera presets for like Fuji and Kodak. And I was definitely going for that Fuji look, like the old retro kind of Fuji cameras. And I messed with some film grain and some, LUTs that are produced by the camera manufacturer. And I ended up with the final renders, which is this one. So you can see this is a lot grungier, a lot darker than what you saw in in Nuke, and that's why that's because I applied that final color grade in Premiere on the entire animation. And so here are some breakdown images of the entire set. I used heavy displacement. All the spider webs were done with curves. So everything was pretty much like for this project, the challenge was, if you can make it. Don't rely on texture too much. Like the only texture, the place where I relied on the texture was the walls. I didn't want to model each crack and cranny because I had this beautiful displacement textures of the concrete. But pretty much everything else is modeled by hand or sculpted in ZBrush or something like that, and just relied on displacement and hand modeling to get the final look. So that was pretty much my presentation. I hope it was useful, and if there's any questions, I guess we can take it to the chat room and start answering them.
Perfect. So going to make a 30-second break and come back with the questions and answers. It was a great presentation, amazing stuff really. So I'm glad that this is a course that you can buy and watch it and definitely learn something, because what I've seen, the hard software is amazing, the textures and the renders. Like I mentioned to Darko, he just lost me when he opened Nuke, so I'm not a Nuke type, but definitely you can now ask the questions. So, but first I have one question. For, let's say, when you're creating a scene, you want, let's say, to get inspired, or you're just wandering the cities or the internet to find some reference? And how do you find your reference? Is the reference commercial use, not commercial use? You have your own pictures? So I definitely want to ask that.
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because I do use pretty much all of the available resources that I can find, but I try to use my own references, or my own photographs, I should say, as much as possible, because the way I snap photos is kind of unique to me, and the angles that I'm interested in are not always easily accessible on the internet. So to answer the question is, I try to, like, for inspiration, I use ArtStation, I use I watch movies and stuff like that. So for this one in particular, The Shape of Water was one of the movies that kind of inspired me, because they have this kind of big hallway scenes, and the color grading especially was inspired by that movie. But the main inspiration for this project in particular came from the story. So something that is very interesting and not a lot of people know is, I would say the last 5-6 projects that I did, personal projects, they're all connected to a single story. And the story is massive, and like I'm writing it for like a couple of years now, and I'm not really sure like what it's gonna be in the end. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna pitch it to become something, but for me it's just fun. So in my free time, I would write something, and then I would try to kind of come up with like visual kind of language of the things. So I started to establish how the world would look like, how the characters would look like. For example, the goblin, the latest project, the innocent guy, this experiment, and the beast, they were all kind of from the same kind of universe, so they have a similar vibe to each other. So if later on this becomes a big project, I can actually just take them and use them as a mood board for how this story would develop. So yeah, that was pretty much the inspiration for this thing.
Yes, thanks, because before you had one more presentation that we organized, and definitely I was in love that you're taking so much time to gather an amazing reference. So I think many of the artists that when they're starting a project, they are making the most important mistake, that they don't have enough reference, enough views, so they will just end up losing the whole, let's say, potential of the scene.
Yeah.
Now Darko will start reading the questions, and
Questions. I can't scroll.
okay, yeah, I will going to pass them here. So here is the M3S.
Workflow for UDIMs for Maya Substance Painter. How do you prepare ID maps and shaders? Yeah, I didn't really have the time to talk about texturing and UDIMs and all that, but pretty much UDIMs in Substance, they are supported, but kind of in a limited way, right? So you can't really paint across UDIM sets. So this project was a big procedural test for me. So the main door, the fire extinguisher, and the lab code, the torn lab code, I think were pretty much the only assets that I textured in Substance Painter. Everything else was textured textured procedurally using Maya and Arnold. So what I do is I do pretty much the same thing you would do in Substance, but in Maya Hypershade. So I would create a metal shader. Let's say I'm texturing the door, and the underlying structure of the door is metal, right? So I would create a shiny kind of titanium kind of metal shader, and then I would create a paint shader, and then I would blend them together using AI blend material, it was called. And then I would add, let's say, a grunge map in the blend amount. And then I would combine the grunge map with the AI noise to kind of break it up. And then I would take all of those nodes and I'm going to combine them with a multiply divide node, for example, with ambient occlusion. So the grunge is going to happen more in the crevices. It's pretty much recreating Substance Painter's masks by hand. The flexibility you get from that is you make one procedural shader and you can apply it to every metal in the scene, and it's going to look unique because the ambient occlusion for that metal is going to be different because of the structure of that. And also you avoid all the baking processes, and you have infinite resolution because AI ambient occlusion node is mathematical function that determines the shadow between two objects. So I can render 8K images and I'm not going to get blurriness or anything like that. UDIMs, I try to separate UDIMs per material. So if I have metal, plastic, wood, and glass, I would say all the glass is one UDIM, all the plastic is next. And in that way, when I go in Substance, I can work individually, and I don't have to paint across UV scenes because that's not supported. So that's kind of the hack that I do.
Okay, so basically, most of the audience that the previous questions were asked, where they can they find the link for the tutorial for the course?
And try to drop that in the chat right now. So it's on the Flip Normal's website. It's modular environment creation for production, and for in honor of this presentation, I gave 50% off for everybody who is listening today. So you can all go and grab it 50% off. And if you have any questions, My email is art@darkomitev.com, so feel free to drop me a question, and I'll be happy to answer if I can. Right, so...
Yes, also there is one question that was missed because... okay... it was about the denoiser in Nuke.
So in Nuke you have a couple of denoising options, and like I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a compositor. All of this stuff that I did, I learned on the project, right? So pretty much when I realized my renders are noisy, I had two options: learn how to denoise or re-render again. I couldn't re-render again because the render took a long time and render farm. So the only option was fix it in comp. You know that expression, right? So the denoiser was the denoiser is actually a built-in noise node in Nuke, and one of the latest versions in Nuke. And if you use it carefully, it actually has a couple of cool options. It can detect edges and stuff like that. So it's going to try to smooth out only flickering kind of noises. And it's not the best denoiser, I'm going to be honest. But if you use it on a AOV level or like a separate pass level, for example, if you apply the denoiser on the final render, it's just going to wash everything out and you're going to lose all your details. But if you apply it only on the specular or only on the volume, your diffuse detail is going to get preserved. Your subsurface detail is going to get preserved. So then when you combine, you don't lose as much. So that's why I broke everything into separate layers, and then I denoise them one by one. And then, however, it's kind of applying like a Gaussian blur kind of effect, almost, not exactly, but like almost. It has a similar effect in the end. So that's why I found that gizmo on the internet. There's a website for Nuke. I forgot the name of it right now, but I can Google it. What's it called? Nukepedia or something like that. And then people who create kind of gizmos, and a gizmo in Nuke is a combination of nodes. It's like nothing. It's not a custom tool you script or something. Well, it could be, but a gizmo can be two nodes separate, combined together, and you can call that a gizmo, right? So I just Googled how to sharpen stuff in Nuke, and somebody was, explaining, just do this, and then connect this node here, and then crunch the levels, and then apply that on top. And I did that, and it worked. So how actually works, I have no idea. If you ask me a technical question, how exactly the sharpening works, I'm going to say, I don't know. I found it. It works. That's all I need. I'm not really a compositor, so I'm not going to go too in depth. But I kind of try to learn the stuff that I need to get the job done. So like you can't remember anything. Even if you spent months learning something and then you don't use it for 2 months, you're going to go back to it and you're going to be like, what was I doing? So I try to learn whatever I need to get the project done, and that's about it.
If you missed the denoiser, so later you're going to see into the past stream. So I can see in the chat, previous question in the chat. I will play the intro video again that you have sent me. Is it okay with you? Okay, give me a sec. Okay, so we are back. The questions that were not answered, you can copy and paste it again so Darko can read it.
Let's see. There was a question about before I saw how do you find motivation to do personal work? Actually, let me answer this one because I saw it. The sound was done by a sound designer in Brownback Films called James Nolan, and he's just awesome, and he helped me do the sound. So I didn't do the sound. I'm not going to take credit for it. So that was that's the answer to that. I didn't do the sound. How to determine when to add topology around the shapes when placing multiple objects on top of one another, especially the chamber doors and all the props on top. So yeah, that's a great question. I try to keep even topology because when you subdivide things, you kind of want them to be kind of the same size. Because if you have a large rectangular polygon next to a very small one, when you subdivide, especially if you have a texture on top of it, the UVs will not they will compress in one area and they will stretch in another area, right? So the more even topology you get, the more better smoothing you're going to have and the more optimized models you're going to have. One rule that I use is a power of two topology. So if I have an edge, I try to put one supporting loop next to that one. And then I would add another one, which is like twice the distance of the first two, and then another one, which is twice the distance of all of them. So that way I have a gradient of loops going into the corner. So when I subdivide, I don't get from here to here, but rather my subdivision kind of ease out towards the corner. And that also helps when I go in ZBrush and I start sculpting, because what happens is if you add loops only on the corners of the edge, when you subdivide in ZBrush, those corners are going to get millions of polygons, and the middle of the object is going to get only a few thousand. So that is never good. That's why I try to get like a gradient of edge loops, so my topology would be distributed better. And some of the objects, like when I try to optimize things so they look okay from the camera, right? I don't want to spend A, the time, and B, the polygon budget on a prop that's going to be either very small or very far away from the camera. So if you zoom in on my scene, for example, on the door in the section like inside, I have all the bolts with all the screws modeled inside and everything. But then if you flip the camera around and you see the bolts on the pipes, they're just a hexagonal thing with a bevel. So I try to kind of optimize so that I don't kill my RAM, because if you take the high-res bolt and you duplicate it 6 billion times for every single prop, then you're never going to be able to open the scene, let alone render it, right? So that's one of the things I try to do. How hard is to learn Nuke? Nuke, actually, it kind of depends. If you are familiar with node-based workflow for Maya, Substance Designer, any of those packages, I think it's going to be a lot easier to kind of wrap your head around Nuke, because Nuke is intimidating because it has a lot of options, but in reality, you don't use 70% of them for your day-to-day work. Like all the 3D section stuff in Nuke is huge. I've never used it. I know how to use it for matte paint and stuff like that, but I never actually had the need to use it. So that's kind of the same thing like with Maya. Maya is like a huge software, but you don't actually need to learn all of it to know how to model in Maya. So kind of the same thing. Nuke is very easy because you take one node and you duplicate it a bunch of times and it can do wonders, right? So to recreate a comp, you need a shuffle, so you can extract the render pass out of the beauty render, and you need a plus node or a merge node. I'll keep calling it plus node. A merge node. And usually all of the render passes are combined with a plus operation, except if you have ambient occlusion, that would be multiply, because that's just black and white that goes on top. So like 75% of my comp is plus and shuffle nodes, right? And then you have the grade node, which is pretty much a fancy color correct. And then you have what else? The God ray. The God ray node is pretty much dispersing light kind of node that can simulate kind of like a volume fog. But I use it to fake chromatic aberration. I use the actual render instead of like a ZDAP pass or something like that, or a volume pass into the God ray node, and I disable the green and the blue channel, and I take the red channel and I offset it by like 1 pixel. And if you like really zoom in, you're gonna see like a red fringe around the objects, and that's an anomaly of especially of the older cameras. They were like the glass, the diffraction of light going through the lens would create these anomalies in the film. And because I was going for that old retro kind of vibe, Fuji style cameras, I added that. And again, what else? A defocus, which is a fancy blur node that can use a black and white image. And that's about it. Like that's all I know how to do in Nuke. I don't need all of the other fancy stuff. Like, so that's at least how I learn things. Might not be the best way, but it works for me.
Whatever works is the right way.
Yeah, I guess. How to improve texturing and lighting in Maya? What will you suggest to start at photography? Yes, so photography actually is a great way if you want to get good at lighting and rendering, because with photography you kind of get to use real world, especially if you use DSLR cameras, like that kind of photography, because you are exposed to parameters that exist on a camera like ISO, shutter speed, all those things that make or break an image. And a lot of the new render engines, the current render engines, they have those controls. So you like in Arnold cameras, you have shutter speed, you have ISO, you have f number. So if you know how to use a camera, if you know how to make an appealing image, how to like properly expose your image with a camera, you're gonna have a lot easier time doing that in a 3D package, because it's the same thing, right? Plus you have a couple of options in 3D that you can cheat that you can't really do, like light linking and stuff like that. So definitely I would say study photography. And also one thing that I really recommend for lighting is try to watch movies and kind of find a frame that you really like and freeze frame it and try to understand where the light is coming from, how many lights they use. Even if you don't get it 100%, you can kind of isolate, well, what kind of light the character has on the left side and on the right side, and is it front lit or is it backlit? What kind of a feeling that emotes to the viewer? Like if you put a light on the bottom, that's gonna make things look scary, menacing looking. If you look, if you put the lights from behind, you get nice subsurface scattering, and so a lot of these things kind of play into making a good final render. Do you use one shader if you are moving to substance with transparency? Do you use alpha blending? How does that work with Arnold? Yes, alpha blending does work with Arnold pretty good. Arnold nowadays, luckily, is pretty much a standard PBR shader from Substance. So at this point, I don't even bother exporting the images with Arnold preset, because I noticed the Arnold preset and the standard PBR preset give me 100% exact same result. So, and also the benefit from that is Redshift and V-Ray, which I also use for different projects, they all accept now the same texture, so you don't have to convert anything. Even V-Ray has a roughness checkbox if you don't want to invert your glossiness maps. So, we're kind of, the industry is kind of converging into this one kind of stream of doing things. So they all trying to unify and kind of work smart, because they know that like even in in one studio, you always end up using different render engines. There's no one render engine best for everything or for every project. In Brownback, we use 2-3 different render engines for different productions. So it's whatever works, I guess. So transparency, they do work properly. So if you paint it in Substance and if you render it with iRay, let's say, and it works well, it's gonna work just as well in Arnold. Do you like to create more realistic or cartoon characters? I don't have a bias. Again, for me, it's all about change. I really like to switch things up. So, for example, I mentioned this at the beginning on the presentation. The thing that kills me is monotony. If I need to do characters and only characters and nothing but characters, or stylized, for example, characters, for the rest of my life, I'm not going to probably be an artist 5 years from now. Because it's the same thing over and over again, especially if you're working for the same company and you do the same kind of style they do all the time. And you do the same, mostly the same design language, and it's kind of like breaks your will because you don't have a reason to learn anything new. You don't have a reason to progress. So for me, it's all about what can I do to make myself better. Darko tomorrow needs to be better than Darko today. That's rule number one. If my, for example, my production life, my production work can't really do that for me to the level I want, I do that with personal projects. And this kind of combines with the previous question of how do you find motivation to do personal stuff. That's how. I kind of feel like I'm stagnating if I don't do any personal work, because when I do personal work, there's nobody around me to judge me or tell me you can't do n-gons on a curve because that's gonna deform bad. I can try it. If it doesn't, I'm gonna leave it. Do you do that in production? Absolutely not. Can you do it on a personal project? Absolutely yes. So that's kind of the, like a lot of people, like every personal project has to be, for my portfolio, it has to be the best topology, the best shaders. Like, no, dude, it's supposed to be fun. I try to kind of remember why I started doing this. It's because it was fun. I will go home from school, I would open up Maya and be like, okay, I'm going to make a candle today. How do you make a candle? Okay, candle is a cylinder. So you just start from a cylinder and you figure things out like you're being a kid again. And that's how I feel when I kind of work my personal projects. I don't know how to, like right now I'm learning Bifrost. Like I for my previous project, I asked my colleague to do the fluids for me, but right now I'm doing another project which requires like snow being dragged into the air and particles and all that. And I'm like, yeah, I can't rely on other people doing my stuff forever. Like I need to learn this. So I always try to pick a project that kind of challenges me in a way that the other project haven't in the past. So that's, I guess, the answer to those two questions combined.
Well said. It was a nice motivational speech, I'll say it.
Oh, thanks. And mastering Arnold and lighting. Arnold is the simplest render engine on the planet. The reason Arnold is simple is because the way they created Arnold was the artist time is more valuable than render time. Arnold is one of the slowest renders, but it's one of the easiest. And the reason is you don't bother tweaking GI. It does not flicker. It does not has any fancy options for final gathering like mental ray or storing point cloud data and reusing it, like all these cheats that you usually have with V-Ray and all the others. So you're kind of separated from all the technical stuff and you're left to be an artist. If you have an aperture light at home and if you have an area light in Arnold, it's the exact same thing. You model your scene in the real world scale. You create an area light 2 meter by 1 meter. That area light behaves like a real aperture light that is 2 meter by 1 meter with a specific voltage, right? So the thing that's very easy is I follow photographers on YouTube like all day long, like Peter McKinnon, all the others, like popular ones. Also, how to shoot product photography. I watch all of these videos because you can do exact same thing in Maya. Arnold is like so streamlined that you have subdivisions for noise. You have more subdivisions, you have less noise. That's all about it. You don't deal with anything else. And the good thing is they broken down the subdivisions in Arnold. So you have, let's say you have a lot of glass, so you can only increase subdivisions for glass for the refraction, but not for the diffuse. That's kind of the optimization part, which is like a little bit technical. But everything else is, you're a lighter, you have a light. There you go. Just go and do your stuff. There's no sugarcoating. There's no kind of it's kind of like a very bare bone kind of thing to say, but it is the reality. Like, you don't really need anything else. Like shading and stuff is a whole different thing, but like especially just lighting, that's all about it. Is it me, or when you start working first few months, maybe years, for people, I feel like you start learning the workflow and the company you're in? Do the personal projects start after or during this period? The personal projects never end and they never stop. For me, like, this is like, and I've been told I do a lot of personal stuff, so I probably not, I'm like not the best guide. I always have at least 4 personal projects active at every single point in time. Right now, I'm doing 1 freelance project, I'm teaching a class, I have a day job, and I'm doing 2 personal projects. So it's a bit much, but it keeps me busy. And I don't stress about them. Like, when I'm starting, let's say if I start on a new job in a new company and have a massive new workflow to learn, obviously I'm going to prioritize that over my personal project. Like, that's my stuff. Like, I can delay it for a month and nobody will care. Nobody even know it exists. So, be smart about it. If you have stuff that you need to learn for, day-to-day job, obviously prioritize that. But personal projects kind of serve to inspire you to be an artist, A, and B, to learn stuff that you don't have the time to learn when you are at work. So that's how I look at them, and that's how I approach them. You can use, do you use Arnold lights or do you use Maya lights? You can use both. There are certain lights that are not acceptable in Arnold, the native Maya lights, like I think the ambient light and the volume lights. The only one that you cannot really use in Arnold. But I've used directional lights, point lights, spotlights, and all the Arnold area lights. The kind of official story is that Arnold lights are a little bit more optimized for Arnold specifically, and they would render faster. I've done hundreds of tests, and they render exactly the same. I don't know if people who wrote the documentation are testing on scene with billions of polygons and trillions of lights, then maybe it will make a minute of a difference. I don't know. In my tests, for an average user that makes scenes and characters, it doesn't make absolutely any kind of difference. So yes, you can use both, and they work perfectly fine. Every Maya light has Arnold section. So if you are using, I would recommend using the Arnold section in that light, just so you are sure that the settings you are using are compatible. But other than that, yeah, feel free to do whatever, use all of them. How different is when you model an object for movie compared to games, or just the same? It's a lot different. When you usually, well, they're different on multiple levels. Game, especially, well, it's let me start again. When you're working for a game, you need to make the model be as pretty as possible, but also optimized, right? So you're not going to use support edges. You're not going to use crazy displacement maps and all that stuff. You're going to want to bake all of that into your normal and your specular, so they will simulate that, right? So when you're working for a movie, you have no limitation. Well, almost no limitation. I've used 32K map on that wall that it has like the displacement. If you use 32K displacement in Unreal, it's gonna pack your stuff and uninstall itself from your computer. It's gonna be like, you're just mental. Like, what are you doing?
It will leave the country.
Yeah, like obviously, like there are limitations to real-time graphics. Like we don't have the capacity to do that, right? So when you're doing stuff for movie, you can go bananas crazy with high poly. You can do like all details you want. When you work for games, you will do the same thing, but then you're going to go and make a low poly cage, and you're going to bake all the information to the low poly and fake that you have the high poly. That's the main difference. Where do you find the time for personal projects? That's a very good question, and I have no idea. I guess I sacrifice going out. Like it's not like I'm not going out at all, but I don't go out every weekend. I don't go. I don't play games too much, to be honest. I used to play a lot more games. Like I play 1 to 2 games a year, which kind of sucks if I'm honest. But hey, I like playing games. I like playing games that has a nice narrative, like a story. I try to kind of play games and watch movies that kind of inspire the style that I'm kind of nurturing. Like I'm not gonna watch a random movie just because it's a random movie and people say it's good. Like it needs to have a good story. It needs to be in a specific style that I want it, because that will fuel my visual library. And tomorrow when I design stuff, like my brain automatically starts picking stuff that I've seen in the past, and you're designing is nothing but copying stuff you've seen and changing it. Like your brain literally search through your archives and be like, hey, we saw this in Avengers and we saw this in Gears of War, let's combine it and make a sword. That's pretty much how your brain works. It's very cruel, but it's true. So you have to have a big kind of visual library if you want to design stuff. So I do watch documentaries, I watch movies, but I don't watch like a lot of TV shows. I don't play a lot of games. So kind of make time. I don't sleep a lot as well. I sleep like 5-6 hours a day. That also helps kind of crunch in more time. And yeah. Where do you find most inspiration from? I think we kind of touched base on that one before. Inspiration can come from anywhere, really. Like for me, I don't look for inspiration. Inspiration just finds me. You could be doing any, like I can be on the train going to work, and I would see an old man with an interesting hat silhouetted by the sun into like a completely different form that doesn't even look like a human, and I'll be like, hey, that could be an interesting creature. I don't specifically go and be like, okay, today I need to be motivated and I need to work, so I need to be inspired, and it doesn't work like that. Like I would go to work and I would just find random stuff. I would see people, objects, I would hear a story and try to visualize it. Like somebody would explain a video that they saw, and I would try to like imagine how that would look like in my brain, and sometimes it kind of gives me an idea for something. And we have this deal hour at work, so you can take an hour of your time and just do whatever you want. So I use those religiously, and I would just sculpt. I'd do like a speed sculpt, like an hour speed sculpt, lunch breaks as well. If I'm not hitting the gym at lunch, I either do a quick walk around the block, and then do a lunch sketch. And all of those sketches eventually become personal projects, like all like that. The last guy you saw, the innocent, that started as a lunch sketch. I had an idea in my mind. I kind of wrote a piece of paper, and then lunch break sketch, and then I was like, this can be a character, and kind of developed it from there.
So I think there is an interesting question. In which industry do you work, or you have your own company gig? You should have, yes, you definitely have a bunch of history with a company and being a lead artist and living for another company. So I would like to hear that again.
Yeah, so I kind of work in most of the industries, to be honest. Like I said, monotony kills me. If I do one thing over and over again, I'm gonna go nuts. So I started in FX3X in Macedonia. I was junior, and you kind of learn on the job. Like Marco, actually, the guy who was like not the last, but the second to last, the stream. Marco Chulev, he was my first supervisor. He had so much trouble with me. I was a stubborn kid. So like I started in FX3X, and we kind of worked on TV show animation and a lot of commercials. So I had to learn RenderMan, I had to learn Zebra. No, not Zebra, Mudbox. We started with Mudbox first, and then the movies came, and we started doing VFX work for movies. And like we were juniors, like they wouldn't give us like a realistic hero prop to make. Like we would do the background stuff. But when you're 17, 18, what was the time when I started, I was literally a kid. And like you're over the moon. You don't care about doing overtime. You don't care about anything. So you just want to work on projects, right? And so yeah, I kind of had to learn all of that. And then I was like, this VFX stuff is crazy. Like you have to recreate everything perfectly, and then your stuff, you can't even see the stuff in the movie. So I kind of moved from there to go to animation, and I was like, at least in animation, it's usually I started Googling, like it's usually a slightly smaller team, and if you're not working for a huge company, then you have a lot more ownership of the work, so to speak. So I moved to Video House, and I worked there for 4 years, something like that. And then we did a lot of commercials, and I had the chance to do my first feature film. Video House was hired to do the the look development for the movie before it went to the official company. So we didn't do the actual movie, but we did the design. Yeah, they gave us sketches, and we kind of did the final design. We did the 3D models of the main characters, the main set, the look development, lighting, everything, texturing. And then because we were a small company, they gave all of that package to a big company who produced the movie. But my models were used in the final movie. So that was kind of the first big break for me. And then from then, I realized that if you do freelance, you can earn a lot more money than if you do just company work. So I started doing both for a while, and then Swedish guy liked my work, and he was like, "How about I set up a company in Macedonia and you run it and do this big project for me?" And it was a massive project that he was asking, like I would have spent for like 2-3 years. So I accepted it and I quit, and I did that for a while. I ran my own company. We hired like 15 people at some point. It kind of grew very quickly, and then I closed that, and VR started to become a thing in Macedonia. A couple of companies, like a few game companies started to pop in, and especially a Swiss company with Macedonian branch contacted me, and they needed to start a CG division in a programming company, which sounded wild to me. I was like, how do you learn a programmer how to do CG? And they were like, no, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to hire you to make a pipeline for 3D so we can hire other 3D artists. to do VR, but it's going to be rendered VR. And I was like, yes, because I was not really like ready to go straight into gaming yet. So kind of like a nice transition. So I shifted gears and I went into a hybrid of real time but rendered as well. We literally wrote the engine from scratch. I've witnessed how a normal map is coded from line one, and it has to run on a web browser and everything. So it was wild experience. I need to learn like JavaScript and all this crazy stuff that I never thought in my life that I would learn. And after that, I got a job offer from Brownback to come to work in Dublin, and I was hired here as city generalist. And that was on the first show, Battlebane. And then on the second show, they needed character artists, and the first show was finishing up. So I applied for a character artist as a senior, and this year I'm a lead. And yeah, here I am. That was a long story.
Yes, definitely. So we have the last question, I think.
Do you prefer working in animation over games in VR currently, but thinking of moving in animation? What is the main software a texture artist should learn to get into company like Brownback? Yeah, so I would definitely prefer animation. Now, that's a tricky answer because there's a company, well, not Brownback, but there's a company in the world who are doing a TV show called Safari, and the whole thing is rendered in Unreal Engine, and it looks beautiful. So if you say, do you want to do games or animation? I'm like, both. Because they're kind of starting to merge. Look at Mandalorian. Mandalorian, half of that was rendered in Unreal. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of the environments were rendered in Unreal in real time. And that's a high-budget TV show. Like, come on. So things are changing on a scary kind of level. And I would say if I can continue to work in animation, I will. I prefer it because I like the pipeline. I like the workflow. Like I don't sacrifice on quality. Like if I sculpt something, I get that on render time. The thing that really bugs me with games is I make my sculpt beautiful. I spent ages like polishing the curve of the shoulder to go with the arm and the forearm and everything. And then I make the low poly and it's like box. And I'm like, no, like like it kind of destroys the artistic soul I have. And like, no, I spent like 11 hours making the curve so nice and smooth, and now it's like all choppy because the engine cannot handle polys. I'm like, come on. So yeah, that's the only bummer for me at the moment. But like Unreal and the other engines, like they're going crazy with what they can do nowadays. So I guess that answer is going to change quite quickly, I guess. And for software, in Brownback specifically, we use Photoshop, Substance Painter, and Mari. So you don't have to learn all of them at once. If you know Substance, and you can do a pretty good job. And I think Photoshop is just a must, regardless of if you use Substance or Mari, because all the conversions of maps, all the tweaks, even paint overs are done all in Photoshop. So I would say Photoshop and Substance, and you're good to go. You make a good portfolio, and yeah, that's all you need, especially in animation.
Yeah, definitely. You need to create portfolio. So it's a good thing that you have shared such an amazing motivational story that you need to start multiple, let's say, personal projects. But definitely you need to finish, let's say, one or two so it can be imported to your portfolio. But if you're a student or you don't have a job, you definitely need to finish all of those 4 projects, because the companies needs to see as much as possible so they can hire you. Once again, thanks Darko for joining, and also if you are able, you should purchase his course. I think it was a nice presentation. I would like to see even more details. How did he texture the assets? So Darko, if you can copy and paste the link again into the chat. And thanks all for joining. So let's just leave Darko to pass the link, and we are going to finish the stream.
There you go, guys.
And
Something, and I was not too boring with my rambling. I know I can talk a lot. So yeah, if you need any questions, I'm on Facebook, on Instagram. So feel free to reach out. I reply as soon as I can. As I mentioned, I am quite busy, so if I don't reply at the moment, don't worry. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just trying to figure out my schedule, most likely. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you guys probably in the next stream.
yes, definitely. So we're going to pause with the streams for now. I think we're going to make a 2 weeks break because we had too many. Yes, definitely. And you should follow CG Rockstars at channels at Twitch because he has a nice streams. And also Darko, you are streaming as well. Can you copy and paste the link, because I have seen you in the last few weeks?
I did 2 streams in total because I set up my Twitch and it was all gonna work out, and then I got freelance job and I totally didn't stream again. Let me see if I can figure Twitch so I can copy my link.
Okay, thanks, catchy name, really. It's been a while. So for now we had multiple speakers, and I'm glad that we were able to organize. And in the future, I hope the conference will be organized physically again, but in time we'll see. And
where can I find the link to my Twitch? I'm complete noob to Twitch, guys. I'm really sorry about this.
yes, we're going to pass it also for the Facebook. You should add Darko. I think it's best there to follow him. Let me just find the link, and hope to see you in the future. Here it is, at Darko, and we are about to log out. Thanks for joining and following the stream. So in the next couple of days, this stream is going to be edited and uploaded on YouTube. If you do like to see more of these streams, you should check out our channel, also Darko's new course.
Thanks, guys.